A routine walk home. A mother, her son, the familiar rhythm of footsteps on a sun-drenched footpath. But routine can shatter in an instant when prejudice wears a badge. An officer, fueled by bias, decides this woman, this mother, is out of place, a target for his authority. He intends to intimidate, perhaps to break her spirit. What he fails to comprehend is the steel beneath her quiet dignity, the strength forged in overcoming life's hardships. He doesn't know her husband is a man who has dedicated his life to confronting the very forces this officer represents. He doesn't realize the eyes of the community are watching, cameras ready, patience worn thin. What unfolds on that suburban Sydney street isn't just an isolated incident. It's a spark igniting a firestorm, a confrontation that will pull back the curtain on a system shrouded in silence and fear, forcing a reckoning no one saw coming. Before we witness this explosive clash between power, prejudice, and the unwavering fight for justice, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. This is a story that demands to be heard. It was a typical Sydney afternoon, draped in the warm glow of the New South Wales sun. Long shadows stretched from gum trees lining the quiet residential streets. The air hummed with the mundane music of life. Distant lawnmowers screen doors closing, neighbors exchanging casual greetings. Leah Campbell moved along the footpath with a steady, familiar rhythm, the rubber tip of her walking stick tapping a soft beat against the concrete. At 42, her face held the warmth of her community, though subtle lines hinted at weariness. The stick wasn't a choice. It was a consequence. Years spent as an aged care worker, lifting and caring for others at a local facility, had ended abruptly with a preventable fall, leaving her with chronic pain in her hip and back. Yet she carried herself with an unyielding dignity, the stick more a symbol of her resilience than her limitation. Beside her, her 10-year-old son, Max, held tightly to her free hand, his small fingers intertwined with hers. His bright eyes darted between the colorful lolly display in the corner shop they'd just exited and his mother's face, his brow furrowed with a child's earnest concern. "You okay, Mum?" he asked softly. Leah offered a reassuring smile, masking the familiar ache. "I'm fine, love. Just a little tired today." Home was close, just a couple more blocks. The reusable shopping bag slung over her shoulder held the simple staples of their life: milk, bread, essentials. An utterly ordinary scene on an utterly ordinary day. But parked further up the street, Officer Darren Wallace saw something different. He sat slouched in his idling patrol car, window down, casually twirling his sunglasses. Wallace, 37, white, carried his authority like a weapon. His reputation preceded him. Whispers followed his patrol car through these diverse neighborhoods, stories of unnecessary stops, aggressive questioning, a perception that he viewed certain residents not as citizens to protect, but as potential problems to manage. Multiple complaints for excessive force had somehow vanished into the bureaucratic ether. Now, his gaze was fixed on Leah. It wasn't her groceries or the slight limp aided by the stick. It was the faded tattoos on her arms, remnants of her youth peeking from beneath her short sleeves. To Wallace's prejudiced mind, ink equaled trouble. His judgment was passed before she even reached the crossing. The afternoon's quiet hum was broken by the crackle of Wallace's radio, followed by the decisive slam of his car door. Leah heard the heavy thud of his boots on the pavement before she saw him emerge. "Ma'am?" The voice was sharp, laced with command. "Stop right there!" Leah froze instantly, Max halting beside her, his small hand tightening its grip. She turned slowly, her heart rate kicking up a notch. She recognized the voice, the aggressive posture, the hand resting deliberately close to his holstered weapon. Officer Wallace closed the distance quickly, his presence imposing. His face was a mask of official neutrality, but his eyes held a cold, assessing quality. "I need to see your ID," he barked, skipping any preamble. Leah shifted her weight, planting her stick firmly. She met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "What's the problem, officer?" Her voice was calm, measured, betraying none of the sudden anxiety tightening her chest. Wallace's lips barely moved. "You match the description of someone we've had reports on. Suspicious activity in the area." Leah's brow furrowed. "Suspicious activity? Officer, I live right here. I'm just walking home from the shops with my son." But Wallace's attention had already drifted to the shopping bag. His gaze lingered on it. "I'm going to need to check that." His tone was low, but the implication was sharp, non-negotiable. Leah's jaw tightened. Does Despite the pain flaring in her hip, she stood a little taller. "That won't be necessary," she replied firmly. "I haven't done anything wrong." Max looked up at her, his eyes wide with confusion and budding fear. "Mom, what's happening?" he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. Leah knelt stiffly, pressing his hand reassuringly. "It's okay, love," she murmured, her eyes never leaving Wallace's face. The peaceful afternoon air suddenly felt thick, charged with unspoken hostility. Wallace took another step, encroaching on their personal space, his large frame looming. His shadow fell over them, a physical manifestation of his oppressive authority. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he muttered, gesturing towards the bag. "Hand it over." Leah planted her feet. "No," she stated, her voice unwavering. "You have no reason to search me. You have no right. This was her street, her neighborhood. Safety was supposed to be a given here, but that feeling was rapidly dissolving, replaced by a familiar dread. She knew deep down this wasn't about procedure or suspicion. This was about power, about control, and the next few seconds would rip away any remaining illusion of peace. Time seemed to warp, stretching thin in the warm Sydney air. The cicadas buzzed, oblivious to the drama unfolding on the footpath. Leah remained resolute, Max clinging to her leg, her own heart hammering against her ribs. She focused on keeping the fear from her face, for Max's sake. But Officer Wallace radiated impatience, his authority challenged. His eyes narrowed, his jaw worked, his hand twitched near his belt. He leaned in again, invading her space, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Last chance. Hand over the bag." Leah's voice, though quiet, held firm. "I told you, officer. I haven't done anything wrong. You have no right." A sneer twisted Wallace's lips, a fleeting glimpse of the contempt beneath the uniform. "You people always think you know the law," he muttered, the slur hanging venomously in the air. Leah stiffened, the insult striking like a physical blow. "Excuse me?" she shot back, heat finally rising in her voice. Wallace ignored her, his meaning deliberately clear. Max tugged frantically at her sleeve. "Mom, I'm scared," he whimpered, his small voice cracking. That vulnerability nearly undid her. Leah crouched slightly, pulling Max closer, her gaze still locked on Wallace. "It's going to be okay, love," she whispered, stroking his hair. "Stay right here with me." But the knot of fear in her own stomach tightened. Wallace advanced again, his boot deliberately scuffing the edge of her walking stick, a petty act of intimidation. Across the street, heads began to turn. Neighbors paused their conversations. A man watering his lawn lowered his hose. Phones started to emerge, held discreetly at first, fingers hovering near the record icon. Wallace seemed oblivious, or perhaps indifferent, to the growing audience. "Listen here," he ground out, his voice low, meant only for her. "I don't care what you think you're entitled to. You're going to comply, or I'll make sure this gets official. Real official." Leah straightened, defiance flaring in her eyes despite the pain radiating from her hip. "Then do your job the right way," she retorted, her voice rising now, sharp enough to draw more attention. The air crackled. Wallace's face hardened. His next move was swift, decisive. He reached out, grabbing the strap of Leah's shopping bag where it slung over her shoulder. Instinctively, Leah jerked back. "Don't touch me," she cried out, her voice sharp with indignation. "You're out of line." That was the spark. The onlookers gasped. A murmur swept through the previously quiet street. "Leave her alone," someone shouted. "She didn't do anything wrong," another voice added, stronger this time. Phones were no longer hidden. They were held aloft, pointed directly at the escalating scene. Wallace's expression contorted, his gaze flicking angrily towards the witnesses. "You think they're going to save you?" he sneered at Leah, turning back to her. "Don't make this a scene for your kid." But Leah stood her ground. "You're the one making a scene." Max pressed against her, burying his face in her side, trembling uncontrollably. "Mom?" he sobbed. Leah gently stroked his hair, whispering reassurances, though her own hands were shaking now. Wallace's eyes darted towards the crowd, now a dozen strong, their faces reflecting anger and disbelief. His hand brushed the radio on his shoulder. "I'll call for backup if I have to," he warned, his voice tight. Leah didn't flinch. "Do what you have to do," she said, her voice trembling slightly but resolute. "But I won't let you humiliate me in front of my son." That final act of defiance seemed to sever Wallace's last thread of control. His hand shot out again, this time grabbing Leah's shoulder hard, his fingers digging into her flesh. Simultaneously, he yanked forcefully at the shopping bag. Leah cried out in pain, stumbling as the strap dug into her shoulder. "Stop it!" she yelled, fear and fury mingling in her voice. "You're hurting me!" The crowd erupted. "Let her go!" "Hey, get your hands off her! You're out of control, mate!" Just then, a second patrol car skidded to a stop nearby. A younger officer, Ben Evans, jumped out, his eyes immediately scanning the chaotic scene. The distraught mother, the terrified child, the scattered groceries, and Wallace's aggressive posture. His hand clamped firmly on Leah's shoulder. "Wallace, what the hell is going on here?" Evans demanded, stepping quickly towards them. Wallace barely glanced at him, his focus locked on Leah. "She's resisting a lawful search." Evans' gaze darted from Wallace's furious face to Leah's tear-streaked one, then down to the broken pieces of her walking stick lying near Wallace's feet, clearly stomped. His jaw tightened. "This doesn't look like resisting, Darren," Evans said sharply, positioning himself slightly between Wallace and Leah. "This looks like you lost control. You need to back off. Now!" Wallace glared daggers at his colleague. "Don't you tell me how to do my job, rookie." But Evans stood firm, his voice unwavering. "Look around, mate. Look at the cameras. This isn't going to end well." For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed Wallace's face. The crowd, the phones recording, Evans directly challenging him. The situation had spiraled beyond his control. His jaw worked, his chest heaved, but slowly, grudgingly, he released Leah's shoulder. He stepped back, though the fury in his eyes remained undimmed. "This isn't over," he spat, the threat hanging heavy in the humid air. Leah gathered Max close, wrapping her arms around his shaking body. As they turned to leave, the crowd parted slightly, murmurs of support following them. The peace of the suburban afternoon lay shattered on the pavement, along with Leah's groceries and her broken walking stick. The confrontation might have paused, but the real storm was just gathering force. The immediate aftermath felt surreal. The sharp edge of confrontation had momentarily dulled, but the air remained thick with unresolved tension. Officer Wallace paced near his cruiser like a caged animal, radiating fury, while Officer Ben Evans stood watching him. A deep line etched between his brows. The crowd lingered, phones still recording, faces grim. They hadn't just witnessed an incident, they had witnessed an abuse of power, and the shared outrage held them rooted to the spot. Leah Campbell, leaning heavily on her uninjured side, guided Max away, her movements stiff with pain and shock. The scattered groceries, a carton of milk slowly pooling on the hot footpath, crushed bread, stray vegetables, lay as testament to the violence of the encounter. Her broken walking stick, snapped in two, remained on the pavement, a stark symbol of her vulnerability and Wallace's brutality. She could feel the eyes on her back, Wallace's hateful glare, the sympathetic but invasive stares of the crowd. Each step away felt like wading through thick mud. Max clung to her, silent now, his small face buried against her hip. The fear radiating from him was almost more painful than the ache in her own body. She needed to get him home, away from this. But before they could round the corner, a familiar, deep voice cut through the lingering tension. "Leah!" Simon Campbell's ute idled near the curb, the driver's door flung open. He must have been nearby, perhaps returning from a community meeting. His eyes, sharp and assessing, took in the scene in an instant. The crowd, the officers, the scattered groceries, Leah's pained posture, Max's distress, the broken walking stick. His expression hardened, concern warring with a rising anger. Simon strode towards them, his presence immediately commanding attention. At 48, he was a man whose physical stature was matched by his community standing. A local pastor and advocate, known for his calm demeanor but fierce commitment to justice. He bypassed the officers, reaching Leah and Max first, enveloping them in a protective embrace. What happened here? His voice was low, controlled, but carried an unmistakable weight. Leah leaned into him, a choked sob escaping her. Before she could articulate the chaos, Officer Wallace stepped forward, reasserting himself. "Sir, I need you to step back. This is official police business." Simon slowly turned, releasing his family but positioning himself squarely between them and Wallace. His gaze was level, unflinching. "Police business?" he echoed, the question heavy with implication. "Because from where I stand, officer, it looks a lot like you've been harassing my wife and assaulting her in front of our child." Wallace puffed up, his hand instinctively moving towards his belt. "I suggest you back off, sir, for your own good." Simon didn't yield an inch. No, officer, he stated, each word deliberate. I suggest you explain yourself. Right here. Right now. The remaining crowd pressed closer, sensing another flashpoint. Phones remained aloft. This confrontation was different. Wallace sputtered, trying to regain control. This woman refused to comply. She resisted when I attempted a lawful search. Simon's eyes narrowed. A lawful search based on what? Her walking home with groceries? Her using a walking stick? Or the color of her skin? The question hung there, accusatory and undeniable. The crowd murmured its agreement. Wallace bristled. Sir, I am ordering you to step back. It was then that Officer Evans intervened again, stepping firmly between the two men. Wallace, Evans said, his voice sharp, cutting through the tension. That's enough. Wallace spun towards his colleague, enraged. Stay out of this, Evans. I can't, Evans retorted, holding his ground. He turned briefly to Simon. Sir, please, let's just de-escalate this. Simon gave a curt nod, acknowledging Evans's attempt, but his focus remained locked on Wallace. Then tell your partner to stand down. Wallace visibly vibrated with anger. I said back off, he yelled, losing his composure completely. Simon simply raised his hands slowly, palms open in a gesture of non-aggression. You're not putting your hands on me, he stated quietly. You've done enough damage today. Wallace, incensed by the defiance, by the challenge to his authority in front of witnesses and his own partner, reacted without thinking. He lunged forward, shoving Simon hard against the shoulder. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Whoa! He pushed him! Assault. That's assault. Cameras zoomed in, capturing the blatant aggression. Simon stumbled back a step, but regained his balance immediately, the fire in his eyes now fully ignited. Before he could react further, Evans surged forward again, physically blocking Wallace. Enough, Darren! Both of you! Wallace, chest heaving, sneered at Evans. He assaulted me! No, Evans shot back, his voice low but laced with steel. You laid hands on him, unprovoked. It's on camera. The finality in Evans's voice, the confirmation of recorded evidence, seemed to finally penetrate Wallace's rage. He looked wildly from Simon to Evans, to the sea of phones pointed at him. His authority had evaporated. The narrative was out of his control. Evans fixed Wallace with a hard stare. You need to walk away, he commanded quietly but firmly. Right now. Wallace's lips curled into a final snarl. He knew he was beaten, at least for this moment. Muttering curses under his breath, he turned and stalked back towards his cruiser, slamming the door shut. But his parting glare promised retribution. Simon immediately turned back to Leah and Max, pulling them close again. I've got you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The immediate danger had passed, but the fight was far from over. What happened on that footpath was no longer just a personal violation. It was evidence, a catalyst, a declaration of war against a system that allowed such abuses to occur. And Simon Campbell was ready to fight. The heavy silence that settled after Officer Wallace's angry departure felt more like a ceasefire than peace. The residual tension vibrated on the street corner. Leah Campbell stood enveloped in Simon's arms, Max tucked between them, the adrenaline slowly receding, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness and the sharp sting of humiliation. The crowd began to thin, people exchanging hushed words, shaking their heads, but many lingered, ensuring the Campbells weren't left alone, their phones preserving the digital evidence of the encounter. Officer Ben Evans remained, a solitary figure in uniform, caught between the institution he served and the injustice he had witnessed. He approached the Campbells cautiously. Ma'am, sir, are you okay? His voice was stripped of official jargon, tinged with genuine concern. Leah looked at him, her expression guarded but less fearful than before. We're fine now, she managed, though the tremble in her voice persisted. Simon met Evans's gaze, acknowledging the risk the younger officer had taken. You stepped up when it mattered, Simon said, the gratitude clear but cautious. I won't forget that. Evans nodded grimly. I have to file a report, he stated, his eyes flicking towards the direction Wallace had driven. It will reflect exactly what I saw happen here. Simon studied him intently. You understand what that means? What happens when you file a report like that against a guy like Wallace? Evans's jaw tightened. I understand, but it's the right thing to do. He then bent down, carefully gathering the two pieces of Leah's broken walking stick from the pavement, the snapped wood rough in his hands. He offered them to her. I am truly sorry, Mrs. Campbell, for his actions. For all of it. Leah accepted the pieces, her fingers brushing his. "Sorry doesn't fix the damage, officer," she said softly, the exhaustion weighing down her words. "But thank you." Simon gently took her arm. "Let's get you home." As they walked away, leaving the remnants of their groceries and the scene behind, Wallace's parting threat echoed in Simon's mind. This isn't over. And across town, Officer Wallace seethed. Alone in his patrol car, parked in a secluded spot, he slammed his fist against the dashboard, the impact rattling the frame. The humiliation burned. The cameras, the defiant crowd, Simon Campbell's unwavering stare, and worst of all, Evans, the rookie, his backup, turning on him, siding with them. Wallace wasn't accustomed to being challenged, let alone publicly contradicted. He'd built a career navigating the gray areas, using intimidation as a tool, relying on the blue wall and departmental inertia to shield him. Today, that shield had cracked wide open. Those videos would be everywhere. He knew the drill. Internal affairs, maybe a suspension, a slap on the wrist disguised as discipline. But the damage to his pride, his perceived authority on the streets, was deeper. He wouldn't forget the Campbells. He wouldn't forget Evans. This wasn't just an incident. It was a personal affront. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. No, this was far from over. He knew how to play the long game, how to apply pressure subtly, how to make life difficult for those who crossed him. They would regret this day. Back in their apartment, the Campbells sat in the quiet dimness of their kitchen. Simon had retrieved what little was salvageable from the street, but the spilled milk and crushed bread felt symbolic of the afternoon's violation. Leah's hands shook as she held a mug of tea Simon had made. Max sat curled on a chair, unusually quiet, his eyes wide and distant, replaying the scene in his young mind. Simon reached across the table, covering Leah's hand with his own. "We need to decide our next steps, Leah." She looked up, the vulnerability stark in her eyes. "What steps, Simon? File a complaint they'll ignore? Talk to lawyers who tell us it's hard to win against the department? You know how this usually ends." He squeezed her hand. "Not this time. This time, they were caught. This time, there are witnesses, videos." He gestured towards the broken walking stick pieces lying on the counter. "This time, Evans is willing to talk." Leah sighed, the sound heavy with years of weary resignation mixed with a flicker of something else. Defiance. "He'll make our lives hell, Simon. Wallace won't let this go. And neither will I," Simon stated firmly, his voice regaining its strength. "I won't let him intimidate you or Max or anyone else in this community. What he did today, it stops here." Upstairs, after tucking a restless Max into bed, Simon paced their small living room. His mind, usually focused on sermons and community outreach, was now strategizing. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts, lawyers known for civil rights cases, journalists unafraid to challenge authority, fellow pastors and activists who understood the long, hard fight for justice. Wallace's threat wasn't empty, but Simon Campbell wasn't easily intimidated either. He had faced down opposition before. He had stared into the face of prejudice many times. He knew the risks, the potential for retaliation, the emotional toll it would take on his family, but he also knew the cost of silence. As he stood by the window, looking out at the now quiet street, a resolve hardened within him. Wallace thought this was a street fight he could win through fear. He was wrong. This was a fight for the soul of the community, and Simon Campbell was prepared to lead it, no matter the cost. The storm had broken, and the real battle was just beginning. The corridors of the local police command felt different in the days following the incident. The usual banter was replaced by a brittle tension. Conversations hushed, eyes averted. Officer Ben Evans felt the shift most acutely. He sat at his desk, the blank incident report form staring back at him, a tangible representation of the crossroads he faced, filling it out honestly, detailing Officer Darren Wallace's aggression, the broken walking stick, the unprovoked shove against Simon Campbell. It was the only ethical choice, but ethics often took a back seat to loyalty and self-preservation within these walls. He'd seen good officers look the other way, heard whispers silence inconvenient truths, yet the image of Leah Campbell's frightened face, of Max clinging to her, wouldn't leave him. He picked up his pen. Down the hall, Inspector Denise Riley listened impatiently as Wallace delivered his sanitized version of events. His narrative painted Leah as resistant, Simon as confrontational, himself as an officer maintaining control in a difficult situation. Riley, a veteran adept at navigating departmental politics, recognized the spin. She also recognized the public relations disaster unfolding outside their doors. The videos were viral. Calls were flooding the station. "You understand the optics here, Wallace?" she said, her voice dangerously smooth. Wallace bristled. "Optics? I was doing my job." "Your job," Riley repeated slowly, "resulted in scattered groceries, a broken walking stick, national news coverage, and accusations of racial bias and excessive force. Your job created a firestorm." Wallace clenched his jaw but said nothing. Riley sighed. Her priority was damage control, protecting the department's image, weathering the storm. Wallace was a problem, but potentially a containable one if the narrative could be managed. "Write your report," she instructed coolly. "Stick to the facts as you see them." But Evans' report landed on her desk first. It was detailed, specific, and corroborated by the numerous videos circulating online. It directly contradicted Wallace's account. Evans described Wallace initiating the contact, escalating the situation without cause, using unnecessary force, and displaying clear bias. He documented Simon Campbell's calm demeanor until physically provoked. He signed his name clearly at the bottom. Officer Martinez, a seasoned veteran, known for her quiet pragmatism, saw Evans finalizing the report. "You sure about this, kid?" she murmured, leaning over his desk. Evans met her gaze. "It's the truth, Marty." Martinez nodded slowly. "Truth's got sharp edges around here, Ben. Watch yourself." Her warning was prescient. When Wallace learned the contents of Evans's report, his fury was volcanic. He confronted Evans near the locker room, blocking his path, face inches away. "You filing that piece of rubbish?" Wallace hissed, voice trembling with rage. Evans stood his ground. "It's an accurate account of what happened." "Accurate?" Wallace spat. "You trying to be a hero? Think Internal Affairs is going to give you a medal for throwing one of your own under the bus? It's not about being a hero, Darren. It's about doing the job right." Wallace sneered, shaking his head in disbelief. "You naive fool! You have no idea the trouble you just bought yourself." And the trouble began subtly. Cold shoulders became outright shunning. Partners suddenly became unavailable. Evans found himself assigned solo patrols in high-risk areas. His requests for backup sometimes met with deliberate delays. A crudely drawn snake was taped to his locker. Anonymous threats started appearing, typed notes left on his windshield, vague warnings whispered by officers loyal to Wallace. Outside the department, the pressure cooker intensified. Simon Campbell, true to his word, was mobilizing. He met with Angela Green, the tenacious civil rights lawyer. "We have the video, Simon. We have Evans's report," Angela said, tapping a stack of files. "But they'll try to discredit Leah. Standard playbook." Simon nodded grimly. "We need to get ahead of it." He connected with Marcus Taylor, the investigative journalist. "Give me everything you have, Pastor," Taylor requested. "I'll dig into Wallace's record, Riley's history, anything that shows a pattern." Reverend Michael Young rallied support from churches across the region, organizing prayer vigils and peaceful protests that kept the story in the public eye. The strategy was clear. Apply pressure from every angle: legal, media, community. The department felt the heat. Inspector Riley fielded calls from the mayor's office, from state representatives. The carefully constructed narrative of an isolated incident was crumbling, but the system pushed back. Suddenly, an old, sealed medical record detailing a past prescription Leah had taken for anxiety surfaced online, leaked anonymously. Blog posts and social media comments twisted it, painting her as unstable, implying her reaction to Wallace was exaggerated, unreliable. Simon slammed his fist on the table when he saw it. "They're trying to destroy her," he growled, the violation clear. "Trying to make her the problem." Leah felt the blow deeply. The invasion of her privacy, the attempt to weaponize her past struggles. "How could they?" she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "Because they're desperate," Simon answered, pulling her close. "And desperate people do desperate things, but we won't let them win." The smear campaign, however, inadvertently fueled the public's anger. People saw it for what it was, a cowardly attack on a victim. The protests grew larger, more diverse. Chants of "justice for Leah" echoed louder. Ben Evans, witnessing the attacks on Leah and the continued harassment directed at him, felt his resolve harden. He met secretly with Marcus Taylor, providing names, dates, specific incidents involving Wallace and others who operated similarly, details that could corroborate a pattern of abuse and cover-up within the command. He knew the risk. Providing internal information could end his career, even lead to retaliation. But silence felt like complicity. Wallace, meanwhile, grew more erratic. He felt cornered, betrayed by Evans, abandoned by a department scrambling to save itself. His anger festered, seeking an outlet. Late one evening, as the Campbells prepared for bed, the sharp, sickening sound of shattering glass ripped through their apartment. Simon raced downstairs to find a brick lying amidst the shards of their living room window, scrawled crudely on its surface, "Stop now." The police response was perfunctory, dismissive. No real investigation followed. The message was clear. The intimidation was escalating. Leah trembled, holding Max tight. "They're not going to stop, Simon." His eyes, locked on the broken window, held a dangerous fire. "Neither are we." The next morning, standing defiantly beside the boarded-up window, Simon addressed the assembled media crews, his voice ringing with conviction. "They break our windows. They try to break our spirit. They leak lies to break our credibility. But let me be clear. We will not be intimidated. We will not be silenced. This fight is bigger than one family. It's for the soul of this city." His words ignited the crowd, spreading across news feeds, galvanizing support. The lines were drawn. The system was fighting dirty, but the Campbells, supported by a growing movement and a lone officer daring to speak truth to power, were pushing back with everything they had. The breaking point was near. Simon Campbell knew he couldn't wait for the system to fix itself. He'd seen too many stories like this disappear, buried beneath procedural delays, silenced by legal maneuvering, and eroded by the passage of time. But this time was different. This time, the raw footage was undeniable. This time, the community's outrage was palpable. He wasn't going to let this moment fade. Sitting in his modest home office, shelves crammed with books on theology, history, boot, and social justice, Simon began making calls. These weren't shots in the dark. These were connections forged over years of community work. People who knew how to amplify a story, how to demand accountability. He spoke first with Angela Green, the sharp civil rights lawyer whose reputation for taking on police misconduct was well earned. "Angela, I saw the footage," she said before he could even finish explaining. "Appalling. Tell me how we proceed." "We build a case, Angela," Simon stated, his voice firm, not just against Wallace, against the command, the patterns, the system that enabled him. Angela's response was immediate. "I'm in. Let's gather everything." Next, he called Marcus Taylor, the investigative journalist known for his tenacity. "Pastor, just point me in the right direction," Marcus said. "Wallace's complaint history, Riley's record on discipline, any connections. I'll dig until I hit bedrock." Finally, he reached out to Reverend Michael Young, a respected leader whose influence spanned churches across the state. "Brother Simon," Pastor Young's voice boomed through the phone, "the congregations are already praying. Tell us how we can mobilize. We'll bring the people." Simon understood this fight required a multi-pronged attack: legal pressure, media exposure, and sustained community mobilization. They had to make it impossible for the city and the police command to simply wait out the storm. While Simon orchestrated the external pressure, Officer Ben Evans navigated a treacherous internal landscape. The whispers turned into open hostility in the locker room. His patrol car tires were mysteriously flat one morning. Incident reports he filed seemed to get lost more frequently. Inspector Riley called him into her office. "Evans," she began, her tone carefully neutral, "your commitment is noted, but your recent reports, they lack perspective. You need to consider the stress officers are under. It was a veiled warning. Fall back in line or face consequences." Ellis met her gaze steadily. "Inspector, I reported what I saw. Stress doesn't excuse assault or bias." Riley leaned back, drumming her fingers on the desk. "Just be careful, Evans. Loyalty is valued here." He left her office, knowing his position was becoming increasingly untenable. One evening, nursing a beer at a quiet pub outside his usual beat, Ellis felt the isolation acutely. The uniform felt heavy, tainted. His phone buzzed. A text from Simon Campbell. "Meeting tomorrow. Community Center. Strategy session. Could use your insight if you're willing." Ellis stared at the message. Attending meant crossing another line, aligning himself openly with the other side. But staying silent felt like betraying the oath he took, betraying Leah and Max, betraying himself. The next day, Ellis walked into the community center meeting room. Simon, Angela, Marcus, Pastor Young, and several community activists looked up as he entered. The air was charged with determination. They spent hours mapping out strategies: legal filings, media outreach, coordinated protests, demands for specific policy changes. Marcus shared details of Wallace's troubling history, multiple excessive force complaints, mysteriously downgraded or dismissed. Angela outlined the legal hurdles, but also the strengths of their case, particularly with Ellis's testimony. Ellis listened intently, then cleared his throat. "There's more," he said quietly. "It's not just Wallace. There's a culture. Certain officers cover for each other. I've seen reports altered, evidence overlooked." Angela leaned forward. "Can you provide details? Names?" Ellis hesitated, the weight of that betrayal heavy, but he nodded slowly. "Lee, I can try. I'll document what I know." He was putting everything on the line, but looking at Simon's resolute face, at the hope in the eyes of the community members, he knew it was necessary. Across town, Darren Wallace felt the pressure mounting. The headlines were relentless. Internal Affairs was asking pointed questions. His suspension has felt less like a temporary measure and more like the end of the line. He saw the videos constantly, his own face contorted in anger, Ellis standing against him, Simon Campbell's calm defiance. He felt cornered, enraged, like the victim. The system he'd always relied on seemed to be turning on him. His frustration curdled into desperation. Late one night, the sharp shatter of glass echoed again outside the Campbell home. Simon rushed downstairs, heart pounding. This time, it wasn't just a brick. Their car windscreen was smashed. No note, just escalating vandalism, designed to instill fear. Simon reported it, but the police response remained lukewarm, the investigation cursory. "They're trying to break us, Simon," Leah whispered, clutching his arm as they surveyed the damage. Simon's eyes hardened. "They don't understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "This just makes us fight harder." He immediately called Angela and Marcus. The next morning, standing beside the damaged car, Simon didn't just speak to the cameras, he issued a challenge. "You can break our windows, slash our tires, try to intimidate us with darkness and anonymity, but you cannot break our resolve. We see these acts for what they are, the desperate thrashing of a system afraid of the light. We demand protection, we demand justice, and we will not stop until we get it." His words resonated powerfully. The attacks, meant to silence them, backfired, galvanizing even more public support. Donations flowed into a legal fund. Volunteers organized neighborhood watches around the Campbell home. The intimidation tactics had inadvertently strengthened the movement. Ellis, hearing about the vandalism, felt sickened. He knew Wallace was likely behind it, or at least encouraging it among loyalists. He doubled down, feeding Marcus Taylor more details, risking everything to expose the rot from within. The confrontation was no longer just about past actions. It was an active, dangerous struggle, pushing everyone involved towards a precipice. The city of Sydney, particularly the Campbell's neighborhood and surrounding areas, had witnessed protests before, but the sustained energy surrounding Leah Campbell's case felt different. For weeks, the demonstrations had grown. Vigils outside the police command, peaceful marches disrupting traffic, community meetings overflowing with residents sharing their own stories. Today marked the culmination, a major rally planned for the steps of the town hall, timed to coincide with a crucial council meeting addressing police reform. Simon Campbell stood at the podium, the Australian sun bright overhead. Behind him, Leah held Max's hand tightly, her face resolute. The square buzzed with energy, a diverse sea of faces holding signs aloft. Justice for Leah. End police brutality now. Accountability, not immunity. Simon's voice, amplified by speakers, resonated across the crowd. "We gather today, not in anger. Though anger is justified," he declared, "but in hope. Hope that our city, our leaders, will finally listen. Hope that accountability will replace impunity. We are here for Leah, for Max, but we are also here for every single person who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or unsafe in the presence of those sworn to protect." Cheers erupted. Beside Simon, Angela Green stood ready with legal documents, while Ben Evans, conspicuous in his police uniform, stood a few feet away, a symbol of the internal struggle for the soul of the force. He felt countless eyes on him, some supportive, some hostile from fellow officers observing from the periphery, but he didn't waver. Inside the town hall chambers, the atmosphere was equally charged. Council members shifted nervously as Inspector Riley offered carefully worded defenses of departmental procedures. The public gallery was packed, residents ready to speak. When the floor opened for public comment, speaker after speaker recounted experiences of bias, excessive force, and complaints ignored. The weight of their collective testimony was undeniable. Angela Green then presented their formal demands: the immediate suspension review of Wallace, the establishment of the Independent Investigation Board with community oversight, mandatory bias training, and transparent data reporting on police stops and complaints. Finally, she called Ben Evans forward. The chamber fell silent as he approached the microphone. "My name is Officer Ben Evans," he stated clearly. "I stand by my initial report regarding the assault on Mrs. Campbell. What I witnessed was wrong, but the problem is larger than one officer." He detailed the culture of silence, the pressure to conform, the subtle and overt ways complaints against certain officers were buried. "I have faced harassment for speaking out," he admitted, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "But I believe true policing requires integrity, even when it's difficult. We need fundamental change, starting with leadership that demands accountability from everyone." And as he finished, the gallery rose in a standing ovation. Even some council members applauded, visibly moved or perhaps sensing the political tide. The pressure on the council and the police command was immense. But Darren Wallace, watching the live stream from his forced leave, felt only fury. His career was in ruins, his reputation shattered. He blamed the Campbells, he blamed Evans, he blamed the media, everyone but himself. His simmering rage reached a boiling point. As the council meeting adjourned and the Campbells emerged onto the sunlit steps, surrounded by supporters and reporters, Wallace suddenly appeared, pushing aggressively through the crowd. "You think this is justice?" he roared, his face flushed, eyes wild. "You think you've won? You destroyed my life!" Simon immediately stepped in front of Leah and Max, shielding them. The crowd gasped, cameras instantly focusing on the new confrontation. Wallace, though unarmed and off-duty, radiated menace. "You liar!" he screamed at Simon. "You set me up!" Before Wallace could advance further, Ben Evans moved swiftly, placing himself directly between Wallace and the Campbells. "Wallace, back down! Now!" he commanded, his police training kicking in despite the personal risk. Wallace sneered, "Get out of my way, traitor." But Evans held his ground. Uniformed officers assigned to the rally finally converged, grabbing Wallace, pulling him back as he struggled and shouted incoherently. The scene was chaotic, shocking, but it was captured from dozens of angles. Wallace's final, desperate act of aggression cemented his downfall and underscored the very issues the rally was protesting. Simon held his family close, watching Wallace being led away. He met Evans's eye over the heads of the crowd. A look of grim understanding passed between them. This violent outburst was the death rattle of the old way. The fight for change had claimed another victory, however ugly. The fallout from Wallace's public confrontation at the town hall steps was swift and decisive. The footage dominated news cycles nationally. Any lingering departmental support for him evaporated. The independent investigation, already underway, gained new urgency. Within days, the New South Wales Police Force announced significant actions. Darren Wallace was formally dismissed, his police career ending in disgrace. Criminal charges related to the assault on Leah and the subsequent confrontation with Simon were pursued vigorously by the Crown Prosecution Service. Simultaneously, Inspector Denise Riley announced her early retirement, citing personal reasons, though insiders understood it as a forced departure to clear the way for new leadership. The City Council, under intense scrutiny, voted unanimously to fully fund and empower the new Independent Civilian Oversight Board, granting it unprecedented access and authority. They also mandated the implementation of sweeping reforms recommended by community advocates and policing experts, including enhanced de-escalation training and stricter protocols regarding bias and use of force. Chief Commissioner Monica Hayes, brought in from another state to lead the local command, publicly committed to rebuilding trust. She met personally with the Campbells, offering a formal apology on behalf of the force and outlining her reform agenda. Her meetings with Simon became regular, establishing a direct line of communication between the community and police leadership. A small but significant shift. For the Campbells, life began to find a semblance of normalcy, though the scars remained. Leah slowly regained confidence walking in her neighborhood, often greeted with supportive smiles and nods from neighbors who had witnessed her ordeal or followed her story. Max began attending counseling to process the trauma, gradually returning to his cheerful self. Simon continued his advocacy, now working closely with the Oversight Board and Chief Hayes, ensuring the promised reforms weren't just words on paper. Ben Evans faced a challenging path, While commended by the new leadership and many in the community, he navigated lingering resentment from some colleagues. Chief Hayes assigned him a key role in developing new community policing initiatives, utilizing his unique perspective. He became a quiet symbol of the possibility of change from within. Months later, Wallace was found guilty on several charges, receiving a sentence that included jail time, a rare instance of significant consequence for police misconduct in the region. It wasn't a moment of celebration for the Campbells, but one of solemn closure. One sunny afternoon, months after the hearing, Simon stood in the pulpit of his church. The building, once marked by vandalism, felt vibrant again. Looking out at the congregation, he saw Leah smiling, Max sitting beside her. "Change," Simon began, his voice calm and resonant, "is not an event. It is a process. It is slow, often painful, and requires constant tending. What happened in our city wasn't the end of a story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one we must all write together, demanding justice, fostering understanding, and holding on to hope, even when the path is difficult." As the service concluded, Simon greeted Ben Evans near the entrance. "Making progress, Pastor?" Evans asked. Simon smiled. "One day at a time, officer, one day at a time. We keep pushing." They shook hands, two men from different worlds, bound by a shared experience and a commitment to building something better from the wreckage of the past. The fight for a truly just system was far from over, but in this corner of Sydney, the foundation had shifted, thanks to the courage of a family who refused to be silenced and a community that stood with them. The journey of Leah and Simon Campbell is a powerful testament to the fact that courage often resides where vulnerability meets injustice. It reminds us that the fight for justice is not confined to courtrooms or council chambers. It begins on our streets, in our neighborhoods, in the choices we make every day to speak up or stay silent. Real, lasting change is rarely swift or easy. It is born from difficult conversations, uncomfortable truths, and the persistent courage of individuals refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. Every voice matters. Every action counts, whether you're facing systemic issues in your own community or witnessing them from afar. Remember the power you hold to demand accountability, foster understanding, and contribute to a more just world. If this story resonated with you, if it sparked a sense of hope or determination, please like this video, share it to amplify the message, and subscribe for more stories that matter. Thank you for watching. And remember, together, we have the power to build a more just future.